and we shall kick off our October meeting on October 8th. Hey, the first thing I wanted to pick up on was that some date reminders here for 2025. We'll come back to this later in the day. But reminder that it's time now to get dates already on to your calendar for next year. Terry, do you want to comment on the dates? Because I know this is a correction from what was posted in the e-news. And so the date for the Home and Garden Show, of course, is the same weekend after Mother's Day, so May 17th and 18th in Elma. The garden tour is on July 19th, and that's a different date than was posted in the e-news. So July 19th, that Saturday, is the garden tour date. Okay. Okay. So we kick off today, a full day, lots of things to be talking about here, and lots of announcements coming up to our presentation from David Jennings. David Jennings, of course, he was scheduled to be our July speaker, as you recall, but he had internet problems and could not join us at that point. So this is a rescheduling. So we are pleased to have him join us today, as he is the president of the Washington Native Bee Society. So who knew? Who knew? Okay, so kicking off, lots of things happening in that, in December, October. What am I talking about here? In October, relative to birthday. So happy birthday to you, Helen.
Yeah.
And Terry, Nancy, Beth Day, Dolores, Kathy, Cindy, and Hugh. We still remember Hugh. Coming up next Monday, by the way, Indigenous Peoples Day. So be thoughtful about that point in your calendar. So Helen, any particular, any special birthday, any even number, any prime number, any great milestone you're recording?
Oh yeah, this is the big 8-0.
Oh, hey, congratulations.
How did I get here?
We are so happy that you are here.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Indeed.
And I'm looking forward to celebrating all month long, all year long, whatever.
Very good.
It's good.
80 years young. May we all get there. Okay, reminders also, we have a board meeting tonight at 5:30 p.m., 5:30 p.m. And everyone is welcome to join, to the board meeting. This Saturday, as many of you notes from your emails from Wendy, is a very important training date. This will be at Elma. Do we know what building and what room we are at the Elma Fairgrounds? Anyone?
We are at the pavilion. I'm thinking it's the room, in right where we usually do presentations, but I'm not sure.
That's called the community room.
Yeah. So
yeah, that would be the building in the pavilion where we have our home and garden show presentations. Nice big room, lots of light.
Yeah.
And Wendy, you want to remind us of what times you want to make sure that folks coming are participating?
Yeah, anybody that wants to come for the whole day, they're welcome to. It starts at 9, of course, but anybody that's presenting or talking in the afternoon, if you could get there probably about 11:30, just so that I can kind of walk through what you need to do for the afternoon. We're really introducing everybody on the foundation board that are coming. And we're also introducing the directors of each area and any of the committees, the outreach or the plant clinic, any of those people that are involved. We're introducing them to the trainees so that they're just aware of who does those trainings, because this next year is the important time for them to get their hours in.
Very good. And so if you have any other,
welcome to come.
yeah, and if you have any other notes and so forth, questions about that, reach out to Wendy for this Saturday.
Yeah.
And the 21st then is study group. We're back in Tokeland to look at the Shoalwater Bay Garden, 10 a.m. on that Monday, October 21. So let's hope for better weather than the first time, which I know is a little soggy for everyone. More details are in the e-news. October is also election month. And of course, I know most of us are relatively sick of the overall federal and national and state election time, but we have our own election cycle that, per our bylaws, we elect officers for our next year, the following year, in October. So following this meeting, right, so later on this month, I'll be pushing out an email ballot to all members of the foundation with a candidate list here for next year. And we'll say more about the officers and about the roles in a couple slides here. Another date to already get on your calendars is for next month, Saturday, November 16th, 11 a.m. This will be our recognition potluck. It'll be at the Log Pavilion in Aberdeen. Okay, November 16th. Okay. So coming back again to elections and to our officers, reminder then that and this will be a key discussion point with the trainees this Saturday on the 12th, is the differences between the program and the foundation. So we are here today gathering as a foundation. We are a nonprofit corporation registered in the state of Washington and recognized by the IRS as a nonprofit. We, in our bylaws, allow membership to come into the foundation of master gardeners here in Grays Harbor and Pacific counties. And the program is governed by WSU Extension. And so that is indeed the program that we subscribe to, and we remain credentialed to and follow their principles and policies. Okay. So the board, the elected board of our 2024 foundation is as presented on this slide. That Mike will be succeeding coming up as our president-elect this next month. And and so we'll be this in next year. He'll be our president for the following year, and as all of these roles then are our annual roles that are indeed being that are indeed up for election and up consideration. And then in the individual regions, we have 3 regions that we've because of the size of our geography, that we have 3 regional groups that have regional directors. And these regional directors are Renee, Jude, and Sushila for 2024. So the 2025 candidate list, there'll be a ballot that'll be filled out with the candidates here. But anyone, any member in good standing of the foundation, as well as any interns in the current class are welcome to participate as a board member in one of these roles. These roles at the foundation level and at the regional level, these roles have job descriptions that are included in the volunteer portal. So in the volunteer portal in our website, right, you will see, you can log in and see the job descriptions for all of these roles. If there's any questions, of course, about those job descriptions, reach out to the individual who's currently in that role. But all of our participation is needed to make this foundation happen. And everyone's participation as a volunteer, either as a board role or as a volunteer at large, is incredibly welcomed. Okay. Let's jump into some announcements and proceed on. We have our October to-dos from OSU, and it's a lot of things happening in October here as we are encouraged to get these winter cover crops in now to ensure that we're digging and dividing rhubarb and getting stem cuttings going for chrysanthemums, fuchsias, and geraniums. So there's a lot of things that can be done and need to be done now before the heavy rains come in. Speaking of heavy rains, by the way, I know that my rain gauge here had 1.7 inches of rain just earlier this week when that first deluge. So we've only had a quarter of an inch already today, but the rains are certainly coming and the rains are certainly here. Wintering over, saving vegetable and flower seeds. And of course, we have the Seed Saver event coming up later. Details of that were in the e-news. And of course, this is a key reminder for me in terms of fuchsias. Make sure you don't cut back those fuchsias until springtime. But indeed they can be cut back, and they do want to be cut back. Again, all these details, by the way, are also included. They're included in the OSU Extension Master Gardener site with the planning calendar. So if there's any details that you're missing or would like to follow up with, there's more information on these at that OSU site. Pest monitoring, of course, this is still a time to, this is the time to be paying attention to diseases and fungus that may pick up here on any debris. It's interesting how OSU Extension relative to moles and gophers, they recommend traps. Traps are illegal in the state of Washington, but OSU, Oregon's quite comfortable using traps. So I repeat their recommendation here with the exclamation mark that it certainly is not kosher here in the state of Washington. And of course, a sound reminder of let's take care of weeds while they're still small before they become a major problem over the winter. And then, of course, in maintenance, we have to make sure that, if you're composting with a hot method, it's okay to take your diseased plants. But I mean, diseased plants at this stage should be disposed of separately from your compost, unless you're confident that you really have a toasty compost going. Cleaning, sharpening, and oiling your tools and equipment. Those of us that Mike Carvey was able to address at the Pacific County Fair with his tool cleaning and sharpening benefited immensely from having their tools cleaned and sharpened, ready for the winter. I'm sure Mike would be happy to offer any suggestions, and tips in terms of making sure that your own tools are cleaned and sharpened, as we get into the fall season. Okay. Any other comments? Any other thoughts from others in terms of what anyone else is doing in their October garden to prepare for the winter, to prepare for the wet months ahead? Any thoughts? Any thoughts in terms of response to Rhonda's question that she posted in chat? Suggesting, questioning, what do you think, Rhonda? Should you put in a cover crop on these 2 raised beds?
I had the same question because you can't till it in because it's, at the end of the season in the spring because it's up here. So you'd have to, what do you do? Just cut it off short and then dig it in or what?
Because I've just been doing it with my hands, but all I have left in there now are roots, and I keep thinking the weeds will take over, but I guess it would be no different than the ground. I was just curious if anybody else had done it and found a particular crop that was successful.
I did it one year a long time ago, Rhonda, and the vetch just kept coming back. I haven't had a chance to do it, but I planned to do it in some of my beds this year. The beds that have perennials in it, I just try to cover to protect from rain.
Terry?
I follow a blog of a gardening couple in Scotland, and what they use for a cover crop that I think is just brilliant, they use dried bracken, the bracken ferns. They cover their vegetable bed with bracken fern, and I use a lot of sword fern, but not on vegetable beds because it takes a long time to break down. The bracken fern breaks down pretty quickly, over the winter, and then they just stir it in and, pull out any woody pieces that are left. But I just thought that was a great idea.
Bravo to you. That sounds like a great project for me to attempt doing. I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Won't the ferns spread?
Not that they've been doing this for years, so not in their garden.
Yeah, I have trouble with ferns popping up where I didn't plant them, and once they are there, they're very difficult to get rid of.
Well, I find that the case with sword ferns. They pop up everywhere.
Yeah,
I haven't had that experience with bracken ferns except some in a field.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Terry, if you have that blog URL, if you want to drop that in the chat, just because it might be fun for others to take a look at it.
I did write it down to look it up. So yeah, please do.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that this is Kathleen, that Cindy was putting cover crops on the beds, and she would just mix it in at the end, is my understanding. She probably still is doing it, but she was finding it successful. And she could tell you what she used, but it might have been clover. I can't remember.
It truly is a challenge, given where we sit here. I do recall that if you recall the last time we had Craig Coggins and in as a speaker here. I mean, he was still even though despite our protest about the challenges of cover crops, he was still encouraging us to do that. So it Robin, exactly to your point, he was recommending just cut it as closely as possible. Just scalp it, right? As if you're too afraid of disturbing the soil. But there's no question with the rain, the precipitation we get, preserving that nutrient level into the soil without letting it leach out it's a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge. Okay, so other announcements. I want to open this up to other announcements. I want to just a quick shout out to get those hours. Wendy, do you have any other comments regarding getting hours recorded, and how are we doing as a foundation from getting those hours in?
Okay, so far we have about 40 of our members that have already put in the survey for recertification. And then the trainees don't have to do it this year. And then we have the additional, I don't know, 30 or so people that don't have all of their hours in or have not done the survey. If you have not received the link from me, that means that you are short hours. Either you have to just remember, if you're certified, you have to have 10 continuing ed and 25 hours and anything else. And then emeritus is 5 continuing ed and 1 hour in anything else. So you just need to have those in before the survey closes November 30th. So it's earlier than usual, just so we can do the reports and everything in December. So you need to make sure, if you are short hours, that you put them in GivePulse.
Okay, and I've been getting questions, Kelly, about how do I get to the summary so I can tell how many hours I have and what I need. And so I had asked you if you could pull up GivePulse so that I could show people where the summary is.
So do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that right now?
You can do it. Just pull up GivePulse, and I want to actually show. You can pull up your GivePulse, and I just want to walk people through how they find the summary sheet.
Very good. Hang on a second. You don't need to see my login details here. So I'm going to do a new share here. And okay. So you're saying you want me to go up to my activity then?
Yeah, so if you go up to your name, and on that arrow, you see where it says summary. You click on summary, and that'll come up with all the hours that you posted. It takes a little while.
Yeah, it's working.
There. And then if you scroll down, it'll actually show you the last thing you entered was 9/28/2024. And so people can actually see the hours that they posted and what categories they're in. And then if you go back, so that's how you find out, gee, I only have 9 continuing education hours. I need to get another one. Or, gee, I've only posted 20 program support hours or demonstration or whatever goes in that 35 hours. I've done them, I need to post them. So that kind of gives you a breakdown of what you posted this year.
Now the question, of course, is that this is a breakdown of every hour I've ever recorded, right? Going on.
So that's why I like to go back to that page that you're on, that you were before, and just see, okay, I got for this year, I can count down how many continuing education hours I posted. I can count down how many outreach and other educational delivery and demo garden and plant clinic and program support that I posted. And then if that adds up to 35, then Wendy and 25, and 10 hours of continuing education, then Wendy will send you the recertification.
Yeah.
Kelly, can I show you one other thing as well?
Go ahead, please.
I'm going to share my screen. So
Okay, I'm going to stop share. Go ahead.
if you go into the new view, this is mine. This is the new view. And can everybody see it? Okay. Let's
Can
see.
you enlarge it? Could you make it larger?
Oh, yeah, probably. Just make all this stuff go away, maybe. I don't know if I can make it any bigger. Is it small still?
It's not too bad. If you hear control and plus on your keyboard,
Control and what?
plus, the plus sign, control plus.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. If you go into the new view, which Kelly at the top of yours, there was a little green thing that it said to look at the new view. You can actually go into your dashboard and you can go into impacts. Oh, hold on. It's the fairgrounds calling me. Anyway,
I see impact. Sir,
you can go to date, and then you can put in 01/01/2024 and up till today's date and apply. It'll give you exactly how many hours you've done this year. So then you should be able to do, sorry, I made it so big that I can't now see. So
hit control minus and it'll reduce the size.
yeah, I did, but it didn't want to work. Okay, I still can't get it to work. Then you should be able to do an impact summary right here, and it'll just give those dates. Oops, sorry, I meant to do it by the dates. But anyway, it'll give you, this gave me my whole year, but it will give you the dates, the actual dates.
Right, right.
But you have to go into the new view.
The new view, I see that. Now that's a great tip. Did not know that, and I can see how easy it is to work that by going into that new view. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just go, you can do it by dates. And this is the new view that's going to start after the first of the year. So this is what it will look like after the first of the year.
So automatically everyone's view will change.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's a lot easier. Like it's super easy to see everything that you've done. You can go by your registrations, your groups overall, and then the surveys is the registration. So, I mean, for recertification. So hopefully that helped.
Most excellent. Thank you.
And
again,
it took me a while too. I can't figure it out in the old view how to do the dates. I'm sure there's a way, but it's cumbersome.
And of course, I wanted to put a plug in is that if anyone's short of the continuing education hours, you can purchase a ticket for the state education conference that just concluded, because all of those recordings are online and can be downloaded. So, there's plenty, there's no excuse for not getting your continuing education hours, because it was an excellent conference, lots of great sessions there. It's an easy opportunity to secure recordings for all these sessions. Okay. Any further questions on it, on Give Pulse?
I just want to put another plug in. If you don't want to pay for the conference, it was a very good conference, but if you don't want to pay for the conference, you can always go to our e-news, and on the last page, Katie has CE opportunities, and you can log onto one of those too. So
lots of opportunities for continuing education. Okay, so again, October 12th at Elma in the Pavilion community room then is the session there. This will be the final training for the interns. Again, Wendy, any other final comments, kicking off and ready for the training on Saturday?
I think we're good. Thank
Very
you.
good. It's face to face. Everybody's going to be there,
Yeah.
and looking forward to it. Very good. Any other announcements? Any other announcements from anyone here? It's a busy time. Lots of stuff in the e-news.
Hey, Kelly,
Yes, Elizabeth.
I just want to remind folks that as we approach the elections, we know that sometimes things get a little exciting, is that we all have the right to have different opinions, and WSU actually has guidelines around how we, when we're wearing our badge or at a Master Gardener event, how we need to act. And it wouldn't hurt people to go into the state handbook and look at pages 12 through, I think it's 13 or 14 or something, and just read over what the policy is for WSU and election type stuff.
Well said, and an excellent reminder. I do trust that our own elections for foundation officers will not nearly be as contentious nor as polarized. Okay. Very good. Thanks. Good reminder. Any other announcements? It's a busy time. Very good. Well, with that, I want to welcome David Jennings, who I know is online here with us this morning. And David, we're incredibly thrilled you're able to rejoin us after the internet problems of the summer prevented you from joining us then. So because obviously, we're, as you can appreciate, you're preaching to the choir with respect to enthusiasts for pollination and for native bees. But there's so much. It's amazing every time we go through these presentations, right? It's amazing how much I learn and know that we don't know about this is such an incredibly important pollination source here. So I'm going to turn it over to you, David, to share.
Okay, thank you. And let me just call my presentation up. So can everybody see my screen?
Not just yet. Now it's coming. There you go.
Okay. So first, thank you very much for letting me be here, for inviting me. And I'm sorry about the squirrel deciding that he wanted to commit harikari or something right before the talk last time. It was a very local power outage and fatal to somebody. Sorry, I'm having a problem moving my slides.
It's a great picture, by the way.
Oh, thank you. So I caught this picture up near Slate Peak in the North Cascades, and I was really happy with it when I saw it with the two hands up on the two middle legs of the bee. And I was thinking, oh, he's waving at the butterfly. And then my mentor, Don Rawls, said, yeah, you're not interpreting that quite correctly. It's actually a very, I'm really annoyed view. So it was like, get off my flower. And when I say flower from a human perspective. But if you actually look a little bit closer, you'll see that that flower, as I called it, is full of maybe 30 plus smaller flowers. And each one of those smaller flowers are what the bee and the butterfly are going after. The bee for pollen, certainly, and maybe for for nectar, certainly, maybe for some pollen, although it looks pretty small for the bee. And the butterfly is going for the nectar. I thought it was funny once I learned that behavior to see these two different bumblebees on a flower. They each sort of flipping each other off, sort of middle leg, middle finger type of so just from a humor perspective. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge the Washington Native Bee Society. It's a great group. I'm on the board, and we have membership meetings every fourth Thursday at 7 o'clock. If you go to our website, you can click and get a Zoom link. Dr. Chris Looney is an entomologist at the Department of Ag. He's really worked with me over the years also. I've already mentioned Don Rawls, who lived in Wenatchee and was doing his best to catch and document all the native bees in Washington, of which we expect 700. Through Don, I met Lisa, who was working to help him do some of his work identifying the bees he had caught And then, of course, my wife, who is very supportive of my efforts to run around the state and spend all my time in meetings and things working on native bee conservation.
David, you're not advancing your slides, right? We're just still looking at your front slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So let me see what's going on here. Thank you for letting me know.
It's a beautiful picture, however, so we're captivated by the image.
Hmm.
Recall that the cursor to advance, there you go.
Okay, so let me just back up. So here's the folks I mentioned, the Bee Society, Chris Looney, Dr. Rawls, Lisa, and my wife. Now it's advancing.
Yes.
Okay, so a few minutes on just basic background of biology. Most of that stuff you'll already know. I'm going to show you some other common pollinators. Focus a little bit of attention on why bees are so special from a pollination perspective. Sort of wrap up with some pollination conservation discussion, and then we'll have left a little bit of time for questions. So as most of all of you know, how do I get here? For a flower to get pollinated, pollen comes from the anther, part of the stamen, and has to get to the stigma and come down in to set the seed, so to speak, on the pistil. Pollination is the exchange of genetic material, which in this case is pollen, between flowers for reproduction. And what's key is between flowers and between plants of the same species. If you take pollen from one species and take it to another one, they probably will not be able to successfully set seed and reproduce. Without pollination, the majority of flowering plants can't reproduce. And I'm happy to take questions or clarifications if I misspeak or something, so please feel free to interrupt. When we look at all the flowering plants we know, about 85% use animals to pollinate for them, and about 15% use wind. And wind examples are like ragweed, a lot of grasses, our conifers, when they dump out that enormous amount of pollen, in the spring that gets over everything. Those are all using wind. And the challenge with wind is you have to put a lot of pollen out because you're hoping for a random chance to have it land in the right place to start to have reproduction happen. Without pollination, we're in trouble, and so are plants and wildlife, because pollinated plants produce fruits, berries, seeds, nuts, new plants, flowers, the whole basic 9 yards of why we value plants, both for ourselves and for wildlife. So when I talk about native pollinators, the question is, who are they, what are they doing, and why do we really care about it? A lot of different species pollinate. Insects are the primary pollinators. Bees, butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, beetles, probably a couple more. But we also know examples of birds like hummingbirds that pollinate, bats that help with some saguaro cactus in the Southwest, some lizards down in South America, and small mammals when they go up to feed. I'm just going to walk you through a few of our common pollinators, and for the most part, this group is what I would call incidental pollinators or accidental pollinators. Their behavior is such that it doesn't make it conducive or easy for the plant pollen to get transferred successfully. One thing to note is like this really long tongue or proboscis on this skipper. This is a type of butterfly, special group, different shape than the common ones we see. And it uses that to insert deep into the flower to pull out the nectar. It's looking at nectar sort of as coffee or a Red Bull or something. It's where it gets its energy to live on as an adult. And we have quite a few butterflies around the state. You can see this one has got its tongue inserted into the flower, getting some nectar out. But what you don't notice on these are pollen. So, and you might not have also noticed when you looked at this butterfly is the beetle that was also on it. So beetles also are pollinators as well. incidental for the most part, but still they have the potential. Because they are looking for pollen and nectar, they eat the nectar to give them, sorry, they eat the pollen to give them proteins for egg laying, and they eat the nectar for energy. But they're not deliberately collecting pollen and taking it to another flower, but they are walking from flower to flower on the same plant. So if the plant is self-fertile, this is an opportunity to get fertilized. A really big group that we didn't pay much attention to are moths, and we have day-flying moths, but most moths fly at night, and some flowers are really tuned into that night-flying group. Evening nightshades and others don't even open up until late evening, so they can focus on getting pollinated by the moths. This is one of my favorite moths. It's called a clear-winged moth. You can see where it gets its name. You can look right through the wing to see the, in this case, a flower on the other side. What you also see is that really long proboscis that it uses to drink nectar. You also don't see much pollen on the moth. And then we have our bees. We have bumblebees. We have quite a number of different types of families of bees in Washington. We have documented about 580 plus individual species, but looking at the landscape and other situations, we think we probably have over 700 species, some of which at least may be new to science, and most of which have not been documented in Washington. But what you do see on this bee, and on almost all the, at least female bees, is they're carrying pollen somewhere. In this case, it's on in their honey basket or corbiculum. They have long antennae. They clean themselves to get the pollen off so they can stick it where they want to carry it. But one place they can't pick up pollen is easily is off the top of their back. Their legs don't quite reach there. So a lot of flowers have evolved for their stamen to be contacted when the bee goes down to get the pollen. And that's how the flower has evolved to take advantage of the bees to get its pollination needs met. Again, stamen, pollen, and the flower often has this stigma in a place that it will come in contact with the top of the bee to pick up some few pollen grains. And if you think about it, from the plant's perspective, it only needs a few pollen grains to be happy. It doesn't need the big, large amounts of pollen it's producing. That's really to attract the bee because the bee wants the pollen as well as the nectar. But by bringing the bee in, they'll be able to get the stigma fertilized, and so pollination happens. We have other species. This might look like a bumblebee, but it's actually a fly. Easy way to tell it's a fly is you look at the antenna. There aren't those long straight ones. And also, for the most part, there's no big clumps of pollen anywhere on it. It wants to look like a bumblebee. That's a mimicry so that a bird won't swoop down and eat it. And when I'm in the field, at least at first, it took me a while to be able to easily distinguish between a lot of the bee mimics and actual bees. We have wasps. You'll see wasps on the flowers. They're more of an accidental. They have long, skinny back legs. You don't see pollen on them. They do have those long antennae, just like the bees. But a lot of us have a good sense of what a wasp looks like, based on past experience of encounters. And we have flies that look like bees, or in this case, wasps. But you can look at it and say, oh, it's got really short antenna. And this is an interesting picture because these two structures are well, bees are in a family Diptera, which means two-winged, but they actually have four, but the rear two are really reduced, fundamental, and not really functional. But in this case, they're visible. Other fly in this coloration is more like a bee, again, to startle and prevent predation by another entity like a bird. But you can see this really short antenna giving them away, and really just the two wings. We're the Native Bee Society. I'm into native bees. And the question is, why are native bees different from all the other pollinators? Why do we focus on them? What it turns out is that bees are really key for keeping our both agricultural and wild ecosystem plants communities healthy and diverse. Of all the insects that pollinate, remember, insects pollinate 85% of all the insect pollinated flowers bees pollinate 80+% of those. Another challenge from a conservation perspective is that most bees are very tiny. It's easy to see a bumblebee. Some of the other bees might catch your attention if you look at them. But for years before I got into native bees, I saw little things flying around my flowers, but I had no idea what they were at all. And from a conservation concern, it does seem like our bees are disappearing. What makes bees special from a lifestyle perspective is that both the adults and the larvae only eat or consume nectar and pollen. That's really the only group, with a small exception of a tiny group of wasps that are there that eat as an adult and larvae nectar and pollen. For example, that adult wasp may drink nectar and eat the pollen to get some proteins to lay eggs, but they're feeding their young grubs or spiders or what have you. So because of this lifestyle that bees have of feeding their young nectar and pollen, they intentionally collect and move pollen from one flower to another. Could be they'll have to visit several flowers to get enough pollen to make it a worthwhile trip back to their nesting site to prepare a brood cell. And as I said, 80% of all insect pollinated flowering plants depend on bees. Because as I talked about, you'll see in a minute, other insects, for the most part, are much less efficient pollinators. So here's that clear wing moth again, and it's coming in to get some nectar. But you can see how it's doing it. It's putting its long front legs out to brace itself, sticking its proboscis or tongue deep into the flower, and not letting any other part of its body touch the flower. Because for it, pollen is a problem that it has to get off, as opposed to a resource that's about to be utilized. So when you look at this guy from behind, and I just like this picture because you can really get a sense of why it's called a clear-winged moth. You may or may not have noticed down in the lower corner, that's a native bee. And rather than standing off from the pollen, it's rolling in it, running around and around and around, gathering as much as it can to its body so that it can then stick it to where it can carry it on its long, specialized hairs to take back to build up its brood cell, larvae or pollen and nectar for the egg it's going to lay on it. Very different approach to exploiting the resources from the flower. And this is another example of a fly coming in. Again, they have that really, really long tongue, so they can go in and get the nectar without getting covered with pollen. So in addition to deliberately collecting pollen and taking it to other flowers, there's a corollary behavior that really turns bees into pollinating, into the pollinators that plants have worked to evolve with, or worked with the bees and evolved sort of in co-parallel, and that is constancy. Constancy, the simple definition is faithful and dependable. But in the case of bees, it says that an individual bee, not a species of bee, but an individual bee, when she emerges and starts gathering nectar and pollen for her young, she will find a single flower type and then learn how to unlock it, how to efficiently extract the pollen it wants and the nectar. And once she does that, she will go to that same flower type over and over and over again, which means from the plant's perspective, the plant is having a visitor that is coming from another plant of the same species covered with pollen, so its stamen can get fertilized. And because it's going to many different flowers at that same time, that is an amazingly more effective pollination opportunity for the flowers than the wasps or butterflies or flies that land on it and just drink the pollen. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Just drink the nectar. So if you're only getting nectar and flying away, you're not really helping the flower get pollinated. Once she can no longer find any flowers of that species that she's learned how to be efficient collecting on, she will change to go to another species of flower, of plant. And when she does so, she'll stick with the same approach. Once she figures out that second flower type, she will go to that same second flower type over and over and over again until she can't find any more of that type. And this is, again, stressing it's for each individual bee, not each individual species. So the mason bees that go out, they're going to find a lot of will be on the fruit trees, but others will find other flowers that they can equally extract pollen and nectar from. And what that means is because it's at the individual bee level, from a plant community perspective, it really increases the probability of successful pollination across multiple flower species. Because if other bees have already discovered this flower type and exploited it, she's not really want to go to that same flower. She can find one that hasn't really been harvested yet. How do you see the behavior constancy in action? How do you know that they're really doing that? On a lot of bees, you can just see it by looking at their pollen that they're carrying. So this is a yellow-faced bumblebee. It's fairly common in Western Washington. But if you look at the pollen that is carrying it, it's all one color. And that one color indicates it's coming from a single flower type. So this individual bee has gone to multiple flowers of the same species to gather that pollen. Again, from a plant perspective, really making it much more likely for the flower to get pollinated. Another example, this is a Nevada bumblebee over in eastern Washington. But if you look at the pollen sac it's carrying, the corbiculum, it's all the same color, showing that it's going to the same flower species over and over and over again to get as much as it needs before it goes back to its colony. This is one of my favorite pictures just because of the nice colors, but also look at the size of the pollen that bee is carrying. And there's an equally sized load on the other leg. I mean, they are pretty amazing as far as how many flowers they go to in one outing. Not all bees carry their pollen on their legs. This is a megachilid, and it carries its pollen underneath on the bottom of its abdomen. So all that bright yellow is pollen. And again, that bright yellow is only one color yellow because that individual bee is going to that same flower species over and over again to collect the pollen she's looking for, making it much more efficient as a pollinator. Different native bee, all that orange is pollen that is collected. And again, it's all one color, showing that constancy occurs across bee species. That once an individual learns how to extract pollen and nectar from a flower, she will continue to use that same species of flower until she can no longer find more resources to exploit. It does happen that when bees are out there foraging, they run out of the species that they were targeting. A lot of flowers, once they get their nectar taken or their pollen used up, it can take them from half an hour to 24 hours to build up those reservoirs again. So it's not cheap for flowers to put out pollen and nectar. So it's possible that if other bees are exploiting that same flower type, you will run out of unharvested flowers to go after. So in this case, the bee said, well, I was collecting this orange, but now I can't find any more, so I'm going to switch. But it didn't switch and go to multiple different types of flowers. It picked another one, learned how to harvest it, and is going to that same new second species of flower again and again and again, making the point that bees are such good pollinators because they both collect pollen and then take it to a flower of the same species, either on the same plant or on a different plant. In general, I'll talk about our native bees. We have over 4,000 in the United States, and we're finding more all the time. They are rarely studied group of insects. We estimate we have about 700 plus species in Washington, but we don't know for sure. We have about 585 known species. That means we have a scientist or someone with training has collected it, put it on a pin and identified it, and then logged their findings. We expect we'll probably find another 125 as we keep looking. And the we is the Washington State Bee Atlas. That's run by the Department of Agriculture. It takes trained volunteers to collect museum quality specimens. And then people go out around the state collecting native bees across the year to see what species they find, where they find them, and when they find them. And it's a volunteer program. We can ask me more and I can put you in touch. Just wanted to share some other bee species in Washington. These are all pictures that Don Rawls, my mentor, took. He had a nice stacked photo system, just showing you some of the diversity of the colors, shapes and sizes. This is an individual who carries a lot of pollen on the sides of the lower thorax, as well as the legs. But you can see all the pollen that's on her back, top of her head, that she couldn't really get off when she was cleaning herself.
I think your screen is not sharing anymore because I'm just seeing you. So can you?
Okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Actually, we're seeing, I'm seeing the images, Wendy.
Yeah, I see bees.
Yeah, we're seeing bees.
I'm seeing the images too.
Okay, well, it must be my computer. Thank you.
These are great pictures, true.
Yeah, he was very skilled. Just a couple of pictures of native bees in the wild. There are some amazing green bees. No one thinks about bees being green, but when you see one, if you show one to a kid, everybody's excited. And you can see how they really get deep into the flower to gather as much pollen as they can on their body. Not like that standoffish clear-winged moth. And again, they don't carry it necessarily just on their legs, but sometimes underneath on their abdomen. Lots of different ways to talk about bees, break them into groups. An easy way to think about them is, well, let me say, most bees are solitary bees. That means when the female comes out in the spring or summer, or whenever she emerges, she mates, and then on her own, without any help from workers or anyone, makes a nest, and then makes a series of brood cells where she collects pollen and nectar, puts them together, lays an egg on it, seals it off, and then on top of that lays another one, develops another brood cell. So that she, over the course of her life, will probably develop between maybe 6 and 15 brood cells. And the life expectancy of an adult native bee is only 2 to 3 weeks. Bumblebees live from spring till summer, maybe not the individual except for the queen, but most native bees live for a year or maybe a little longer than a year, but that's a great bulk of their life is spent in the brood cell until they emerge as an adult. And then as an adult, they only live 2 to 3 weeks. It's challenging for the bee if the weather's bad, but it's really great for plants. So because what it implies is that even if it's bad weather now, some of the bees will make it for next year. But when it does get nice, there'll be a whole new batch of bees coming out of the landscape to do those pollination services. So from a keeping the system running, having so many different species of bees really makes it easier to ensure, and that's just the way it happened. It's not to ensure, but what it results in is really high probability for pollination across all the plants during the entire season. So majority of bees are solitary, about 90%, and then some are what we call social or eusocial, where, as an example, bumblebees and honeybees and a few others, there's a queen. They have workers that go out and collect for them, and then they have drones for males that come out late in the season to mate with the newly emerging queens that will be here next year. So in the case of a bumblebee, the bumblebee queen comes out of the ground or wherever she spent the winter in the spring. She already mated last summer. She gathered a lot of nectar to fatten herself up and then went through the winter time, emerges. She starts feeding for herself and starting to figure out where she can put a new nest site in. Then she starts collecting pollen and nectar and starts laying a few eggs. Once those eggs hatch, those are her first batch of workers. There's often a period of about 3 weeks in your neighborhood where you might be seeing the queens and then you won't see anything for a while. And that's because once the queens go underground and start brooding or raising their young, they probably won't leave again unless they have to. And once the young or the workers hatch, the queen will never leave the colony again. It's too dangerous. Gathering pollen is a dangerous thing to do. So ground nesting, tunnel nesting, and eusocial. And eusocial usually nest in the ground, but they will also nest in trees or cavities. I was over in Mima Mounds, which is a natural DNR lands in Thurston County. Something caught my eye. I looked down and I saw, what is that? Had my camera, looked like a bee. I got a little bit closer look. It was totally covered with pollen. And then it went underground. And you can see it's just a single hole, but also from the top of the bee, which you can't see here, that's all of this. So this is the pollen for the most part that the plants, the stamen would be hoping to come in contact with off the back of the bee to get pollinated. Quick talk about bumblebees. I would talk about a couple real quick. These are basic parts: face, head, thorax, abdomen. For bumblebees, a lot of what we talk about are the colors on the abdomen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 is usually tucked under. You don't see it. So we really talk about the top 5. Whether or not the front of the thorax or the back of the thorax has any color, or if there's a dot here, and then maybe the color on the face. In this case, it's yellow. This one hasn't picked up any pollen. It might be a male. But if it is carrying pollen, that's a really strong indication that it's a female. Just this one picture, this is a western bumblebee with the yellow or yellow in the front and white at the back. This used to be the most common bumblebee in Washington, east side and west side, in large numbers in almost every county. We had a disease outbreak. They had raised some of this species. They took it back to England, raised them commercially, and released them. It turns out they brought diseases, European diseases, back with them and sort of went through the population. And now we're about 5% of what it had been back in the 90s. Which the point is, they're still here. We're still finding them on the landscape. And if you see one, you should tell somebody. But with that white tail and the yellow in the front, it's pretty easy to distinguish it from all the other bees we have. One of the most common and easy to identify in our part of the state is the yellow-head bumblebee. It's got a very large black tail, 4, 5, 3, 4, and 5. 1 and 2 is bright yellow, so you get this yellow contrast in black. Sometimes this is red in parts of the state, but around here, for the most part, I see a black tail. In front, it's got black across the wings, and this area isn't nearly as bright as this because it has some dark hairs, black hairs mixed in with it. So that's called cloudy. That's just one of the terms they use, so a cloudy front thorax. And again, you'll see the pollen being carried. So black tail, and then sections 1 and 2 of the abdomen are yellow, and then in the front, black across the top, but yellow mixed with black hairs. Probably one of my top 2 or 3 detected bumblebees in Thurston County. We looked at this fellow earlier, or this woman, this gal, this female, whatever the appropriate term would be. This is a yellow-faced bumblebee. It's really expanded its range once that western bumblebee, occidentalis, sort of fell off the landscape. It seems to have filled part of that niche. It's got yellow on T4, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's got this yellow here. It's got yellow in front of the wings, and it comes all the way over on top of the face. Just an example, this one's collecting from the flower that's giving it the orange. This same species is collecting flower that's giving it that sort of different color. But this is the front view, so you can see the yellow on T4, T4 being the tarsal segment 4 on the abdomen, in front of the wings yellow, and then down on the face. Again, this is one of the more common bumblebees here in Western Washington. From the back, you can see that really distinct yellow on the abdomen and the yellow in the front. And then the other one is the black-tailed bumblebee. I don't know why they call it a black tail. It's supposed to be yellow, red belted or something, because the red is really what catches my eye. But if you look at the black, it actually has a little bit of white coming out as well. So they talk about T4 is cloudy because it has black and white with it, but the T1 is yellow, T2 and T3 are red. This is blurry, but just to give you a sense of that overall sense of what it looks like. And again, we talked about the front, just like in the yellow head bumblebee, black between the wings, but in front is mixed yellow and black hair. So it's more of a cloudy color than this bright yellow on its abdomen. A little bit crisper view, you can see the details. There's a good shot of the black hairs mixed with the yellow in front. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about pollinator conservation. A lot of pollinators seem to be in decline. Some are expanding their ranges, like the yellow-headed bumblebee. The reality is nobody's studied them for very long. Nobody understands population trends. When we look at the landscape level trends, most of them don't look favorable. A lot of different reasons for the declines of pollinators. Global warming is certainly changing the timing between when flowers are blooming and when bees are emerging for them. We see a lot of habitat loss or just habitat degradation between fewer plant species present. So you may not have flowering plants between spring and fall for the full suite of bees, or they might be such a small island that you don't have a very large population on that. So fragmentation is just breaking a large piece of habitat into many smaller pieces. And those smaller pieces are kind of like islands. The smaller they are, or the further they are away from other islands, the less likely for them to get recolonized. Invasive species, and really the invasive species, there are a couple of bees that are invasive that might cause problems, but it's invasive plants. People that are bringing in plants from other countries. It turns out that plants and animals, plants and insects in particular, have a race going on. Plants don't want to get eaten, and insects want to eat the plants. And so the plants have evolved things that are called secondary compounds. When I was back in school, we weren't sure what they were used for, but now we know that they're used to discourage insects from eating them. They make them taste bad, like a milkweed, and only the monarch caterpillar can eat it. In the case of plants coming in from other countries, other continents, the insects here haven't evolved to handle those secondary compounds. So insects can't eat those plants. So that gives those plants a competitive advantage against the natives who are being predated on by insects. Not good for the natives, but it's not good for things like caterpillars and butterflies. It's not good for birds because I was just hearing last week or the week before that a pair of chickadees over the course of raising a brood of eggs brings something approaching 6,000 caterpillars to their nest over that season. Well, those caterpillars, if they can't eat the plants that are non-native, then there's many fewer caterpillars on the landscape to be feeding to birds. And then pesticides are sort of the direct challenge. Neonicotinoids are pretty well known at this point for causing not killing the bees, but changing their behavior to the point where they can't forage very efficiently or effectively. And very recently, we understood that fungicides have a big challenge for bees in that when you look at a piece of pollen, it's actually a very dense, large collection of molecules. And the bee larvae can't eat or digest or break down those large proteins. But when the mother bee is bringing that pollen and nectar in, she's not deliberately, but it happens, picking up spores of local fungi. And those fungi start saying, oh, here's some good food. I'll start breaking this down into a liquid to break it down. And then that liquid is what the bee larvae is able to consume. So if we're using a lot of fungicides in the area, you will be reducing the effectiveness or the ability for that larvae to not starve because it won't be able to digest the proteins if it doesn't have fungus to help break them down. We're seeing a lot of problems with bees, and insects around the world. So this was a study from 2017. They had 63 study areas across Germany. They've been sampling them for 27 years, and then they just said, we're not gonna do each species by species comparison, but they looked at the total mass of insects they caught during the spring and summer and compared that trend of how much they caught in biomass over time. And what they found was 82% reduction, so only about 20% of the insects flying at the end of the sampling period uh, than when they first started the study. And they really couldn't explain that by things like weather, land use, or habitat, since these were protected areas. But it really has a lot of implications for long-term ecosystem functions. How do you have birds without insects? How do you have pollination happen if you don't have insects? And this has been looked at for just bees. The research, I think, was hoping that the occurrence of things like iNaturalist and so many citizen scientists running around, that over time we'd be collecting and documenting more species of bees. So they looked at bees that had been documented before, I think, 1990, and then went and looked between the 10-year period between 2006 and 2015, and they found that rather than getting an increase, they were seeing about 25% fewer species documented. That was worldwide. Someone did a similar study here in the US and found about the same thing. I think this study um, overstated what it could. So I think it's really hard, based on what I know about monitoring bee populations, that half the bees studied are in decline, because it's so hard to detect a decline in bees because they are so randomly distributed across the landscape between years and locations. I certainly can believe that 25% may be at risk of extinction when we look at all the factors we just talked about, uh, but it is a big deal. And we use native bees for pollinating services. Here in Washington, we do for a variety of crops and things, and also for alfalfa. Here's an example of another pollinator. 450 butterfly species across the West have been dropping about 2% a year for the last 40 years. So if you do the math, it's taking down to about 25% of what the population levels had been uh, not too long ago. But we could talk about that all day. It's really, what can we do different to make things better? We can really make a difference at the individual yard level, and that's what a lot of you are doing, planting pollinator plants and uh, thinking about leaving places in your yard for overwintering opportunities, maybe keeping some snags up if you have a large enough yard to have a dead tree or two, so that the beetles can put holes in it that then can be used by the cavity nesting bees. And when your neighborhood shares values and puts up, lots of people put up pollinator plants or habitat supporting pollinators, it really makes your efforts that much more effective. So at the neighborhood level, you can really make a difference as far as keeping pollinators on your landscape. And then, talking to your city officials, city and county, undeveloped areas, dedicating pollinator zones in parks, not just having them for ball fields. How do we manage the roadside? DOT is doing a really nice job statewide looking at some of those questions. And then, state level, we have state parks, we have wildlife management areas with fish and wildlife. The governor and his wife have really set a great example of what you can do on your yard to make it more pollinator friendly, planting a variety of different pollinating plants to support the diversity of bee species, including honeybees. So what can we do? One of my phrases is learn them, respect them, protect them, which is why I get these talks. If we don't even know They're out there. It's really hard to care. Once we know, we can start doing something. So, plant native plants. Look for planting a variety of species across the season, both pollen and nectar producing. But spring through fall, as I said, the average native bee adult flies for 2 or 3 weeks, which means over the course of the summer, you have upwards of 30 plus species of native bees in your yard. Because every 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to replace the species that you're seeing with another group. And then think about what sort of nesting or overwintering habitat you can provide. Raspberry have hollow stems, raspberry bushes. So those hollow stems get used by bees, uh, leaving some leaf litter for the uh, bumblebee queens to overwinter in. There's lots of resources out there about what to do, but just if we're all thoughtful, we can make our yards a lot more hospitable. And I think it's also important. I mean, we live in a democracy, and especially at the local level. And really, we have a really, I'm very appreciative of the legislature we have here in Washington um, to have our public policy be more native pollinator friendly. Um, and also look at things like eliminating the use of fungicides and neonicotinoid pesticides on public lands and garden plants. It was really frustrating to me when I realized that some of the flowers I was buying down in a nursery were probably sprayed with neonicotinoids so they would look excellent when I bought them. But neonicotinoids stay on the plant and in the plant for several years. So if you're planting pollinator plants that's sprayed with neonicotinoids and you don't know it, you're actually causing more of a problem than you're helping. So I think a lot of the nurseries have gotten wise to that and are being a little bit more thoughtful about labeling plants. But you should always ask if you're buying it from a nursery, have these been treated with any pesticides? A lot of times the plant labels won't say, but it'll say things like uh, resistant to aphids, or making it sound like a positive, but in the big picture, it's not. And then speak up and say pollinators are important. Don Rawls, my mentor, he and I spent several summers running around the state and often getting up in the high country. And when he would run into honeybees on the landscape, he got really upset. He saw them as commercial animals that were coming and exploiting, taking resources away from the native species. And so I sort of grew up with that perspective, not grew up, but uh, that's what I heard from him. I had a lot of respect for him. And so that's how I felt about honeybees. And then this summer, I got invited to a pollinator event sponsored by the Washington State Beekeepers Association. And I went and put at my table, but all sort of, ready to be a little combative about the challenge. But as I spent the day, I met the vice president of the state organization, Ellen Miller, and other beekeepers, and we talked about it. And I came to appreciate that they too value a lot of other species of bees besides honeybees. And we all had the need for more habitat in common. So we decided to find that common ground of habitat as opposed to trying to bicker between ourselves about are you good or are you bad? And that has really proved to be an amazing step forward for us and I think for the resource. So in the short time since early this summer, we learned that the state legislature has passed legislation that sort of directed local governments and others to replant ground with at least 25% pollinator habitat. Now, it says to the extent practicable, so for the most part, nobody's doing it. And it also begs the question is, what is pollinator habitat? So we, the Native Bee Society, went to the Department of Agriculture, who's the lead for the state on pollinators, and said, we really need to have a pollinator habitat workshop. They totally agreed. They actually thought it should be bigger than what we were thinking. And so we're now in the process of planning a pollinator habitat workshop, 2 days, probably on the east side of the mountains next fall 2025. We also have, and the Honeybee Association is taking the lead on this, getting a pollinator license plate proposed, with some of the monies going into develop native seed mixtures based on, so let me back up. So I talked briefly about the bee atlas, where we have volunteers running around the state collecting bees to figure out what species are in the landscape and when they are and where they are. The next part of that is to look at the pollen that those individual bees have collected and analyze it to know exactly what species of plants they've been using. Because sometimes when we catch a bee and it's on a flower, it's on a plant, and it may just be nectaring and not necessarily collecting pollen. So we want to make sure what the pollen was. So we're going to be using that pollen analysis to develop a native seed mixture that's based on the pollen we know that's used in that part of the state. And we're also working with the Conservation Commission, State Conservation Commission, to get money to offer small grants to private landowners to plant pollinator habitat. So between local governments and teaching them how to do it, putting on the conference, working with seed mixtures and getting small grants to landowners, between this time now and a year ago, we've made an amazing amount of progress getting changing the landscape for the better. The Bees in Your Backyard is a great book of what you might have and what they look like and their life cycles. The Department of Agriculture has a lot of pollinator plant lists. A free download for bumblebees is Bumblebees of the Western United States. It's hard to find in print now, but you can download your own copy and print it as a PDF. It's very helpful for looking at all the diversity of bees and reminding yourself what you might have. There's a website, WashingtonBumblebees.org, and you go to the species page, you can click on a species, it'll take you and give you the write-up and lots of photos of what they look like, so you can compare what you think you have versus what the website shows. I want to just say we have the Native Bee Society. We welcome anybody. You don't have to be a member to come to our meetings. Thank you. I'll take questions. And I just want to say, if you go to the website, you can click on the Zoom link. It'll send you an email before each meeting. It's the fourth Thursday of the month. We start at 7 p.m. The first 30 minutes, people can send us pictures of bees that they photographed, and we'll work with them to try and figure out to the best of everybody's ability what genus or species it is. We then have a guest lecturer at 7:30. You don't have to be a member. You just sign up and you'll get the Zoom links for free. So thank you. And anytime, any questions, I'm happy to answer.
David, we want to thank you. This is tremendous presentation, and the depth of knowledge that you're exhibiting and that the society is sharing is truly incredible. There's a number of comments and questions we've been posting in the chat, David. If you want to take a look at what's going on over there, I did post the link to the society, as well as a couple of other references that are out there. I'm particularly interested. I want to follow up on a couple things really quickly while other people are organizing their questions. But I'm particularly interested in that native seed mix you talked about there at the end, because this is the I appreciate the species dependencies of so many of the species of pollinators, and the idea of having a native seed mix appropriate to our regions would be outstanding. Is there a timetable or expectations we can think about that?
So I'm really excited about that too. When I started working on bumblebees, I came across that sort of eco-regional concept, and we have different sizes, but eco-region 3, we have about 9 major eco-regions in Washington at that scale. And I just met with the Department of Ag to say we need to get started on those seed mixtures. We've now finishing our second year of bee collection around the state, and we have a conference next fall, so we really need to be talking about what we've got. The reassuring thing was we already have at the state level and between private sector nurseries and nurseries that support state and federal agencies, a fair number of pollinator plants available to meet the short-term needs. But like you said, it's really helpful to know exactly what species of bees are using what species of plants. So the seed mixture won't have 100 different plant seeds. We're going to be looking at, and we were talking about how we'd make that selection, but break it into spring, late spring, early summer, midsummer, and then, late summer to fall. Those sort of four big periods. And looking at the most common both bumble and non-bumble native species and picking bees across at least three families, not including the bumblebees, of the most common ones. So one of the challenges with so many different bees, we don't know all the bees, and bees aren't necessarily, especially in this state, connected to a single plant species. So if we can find the top 5 or 6 plants used by a majority of the most common bees to put out there, then one of the phrases I learned in conservation was keep common species common. We tend to spend a lot of money once something gets endangered, but it's a lot cheaper and more effective to just keep the common species common. So that's sort of our goal here. It'll probably take us several years. We'll do an analysis starting this winter and then next winter on the pollen. And then we'll be happy to work with commercial nurseries or others to build up, to collect the seed and then develop enough volume to make it commercially available. So it's definitely a long-term project, but it's a really exciting project that's close to my heart.
You can appreciate that for us master gardeners, just the plant list would be helpful because we
Yeah.
probably can undertake to find the plants, right? If we know what those plant lists are by ecosystem.
Yes, that's a great point. And the three primary ecosystems we're going to be looking at are the South Puget Trough, which is sort of the west side lowlands, like Olympia, down where you guys are. The east side of the Cascades, right up against on that side where most people are, Wenatchee, Yakima, Ellensburg area. That's where the population is there. And then the what do they call it? I can't remember the term, but it's basically the channeled scablands, a very large center of the state that's very dry. It has a lot of wheat growing. Um, that has some of the least remaining habitat anywhere in Washington. When you look at a lot of the other ecoregions, they're forested. They're on the west slope, west slopes of the Olympics, or up in the North Cascades, or down in the Blue Mountains, or up in the Selkirks, and so they aren't really as high a priority for the seed mixtures because there's a lot of diversity still there. So we're focusing initially on those first three, the channel scablands, the east side of the Cascades, and the uh, 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 Puget Sound Trough area.
Rhonda, I think you win the prize for the most interesting question about how do bees know whether they have too much pollen. Do you want to amplify on that question?
No, I just, looking at all the pictures and I am actively planting native plants, as many of you know, to attract them. And at last year's state conference, the amount of representation about bees and information was phenomenal. And that's where I purchased a great book. But I started looking at it from a perspective of sometimes they just look like they're overloaded with pollen and they can't take off or fly away. And I just wondered if there was observations about, do they become overloaded? How do they know when to stop collecting and take it back to the hive? What's that intelligence that's there? And how do they get rid of the pollen if they have too much?
So I think my sense is, I don't know how many studies are there, that they rarely get so overloaded they can't fly because of the weight of the pollen. That honeybees, for example, if they don't have enough pollen and she's out there collecting the worker and it gets dark, she won't go back to the nest because they can't process the smaller size load. She'll spend the night and finish collecting early in the morning so she can take the right size pollen back. On the flip side, it's very dangerous to be a pollen, an insect or a bee collecting pollen. Crab spiders, accidents, all sorts of flies that want to lay eggs on you, and the eggs turn into parasites in your body. It's a very dangerous world. So it might well be that what you're seeing is someone who has been challenged already by, a bite or parasitoid or something, and so they're getting to the point where they can't finish what they're doing.
Rhonda, you also had a recommendation for a book, an interesting book that wasn't one of your books, David, but was Common Bees of Western North America by Carroll and Wilson.
Yes, and if anybody can wade through that or use it easily, my hat's off to you. It is not like so I have a copy and I think it's a really good book. Uh, Bees are very diverse, very hard to tell apart, and there's so many of them that you don't really know where to start. When you look at a field guide to the birds, it's like, oh, these are birds of prey, and these are wading birds, and these are ducks. It's a lot more challenging for bees because they're so diverse that within a single family, you can have what appear to be ducks and geese and waterfowl, and birds of prey and warblers. So it's a challenging book that I think it's a great book. Yeah, and I would start with birds in my backyard or bees in my backyard because that's a much more digestible, lots of pictures and and the keys aren't nearly as challenging to use.
Leave it to me to pick the hardest book.
Well done, Rhonda. David, we're often asked about yellow jacket and hornet control, and that of course brings us to the widespread use of sprays and foams, right? To take care of yellow jackets and hornets. Do we want to have more use of sprays versus traps? I'm concerned about does the sprays could they leave more? Could they be doing more damage to the habitat than simply a trap? Yeah, are there thoughts?
Um, I think it certainly depends on. So traps do have the problem of bycatch. You're catching other things besides the target species, although they've got a little bit better from a yellow jacket trap perspective. What I've always done is figure out where the hole is for the yellow jackets, and then wait until dark and maybe fill it up with a hose, and then pile dirt on it. So you'll kill them when they won't be swarming out to sting you. But it's one of those things. They also add value. It's not like because they sting us they're bad. It's just because they sting us and they're located where they are, they're a problem. So I support yellow jackets. They do a lot of good things. Eat up a lot of dead carrion and things, but not when they're right beside my garden.
Yeah. Other questions, other comments for David? Again, this is a tremendous resource, and it's very appropriate. David, you're speaking to us even now as opposed to July, because I mean, this is as we're thinking about overwintering our gardens, right? How can we keep our gardens messy to allow that overwintering successes to be optimal?
Yeah, yeah. And again, I very much appreciate the invite to talk to you all.
Other questions, other comments? Again, a lot of information. And by the way, as we've been recording in the chat over, by the way, all of the options and all the links in the chat can be saved. If you go to the very top of the chat pop out, you'll see a dot, dot, dot. And in that dot, 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 you can save the chat. And when you click that save the chat option, you actually can have everything in the chat gets pushed off to another folder you can capture.
Kelly, this is Karen, and I actually have a DVD, but I saw it on public television the other day. A gentleman in England, when COVID hit and had to spend a year in his garden, and he took all these he was a nature photographer, and he took pictures of all the bees in his garden and named them. I mean, they wouldn't be necessarily the same bees we have, but it really gave an idea of the variety of habitats that they need and the variety of bees of different sizes. It's just a fascinating show. So if you get a chance to see it, I would recommend that. That's just fun.
I wholeheartedly concur. When that came out, all of us bee nerds were like, "You need to watch it. You need to watch it."
Yeah.
And like you said, he's a professional wildlife photographer, so he had some amazing cameras for him to use in his backyard. And
yes.
Does anyone have a link for that they can throw into chat?
What was the name of it?
My year of a 1,000 bees or something. I don't know. I'd have to go find my DVD. It's one that I got through PBS, the PBS or Acorn or one of those signals, one of those stations. It was put on, I think it was done by Nature, that TV show.
By the way, another link I did put in the chat, by the way, is the WSU program for honeybees and pollinators program. So you'll see that a tremendous amount of resource that WSU Extension is putting into pollinators.
Yeah.
So that this certainly from a WSU standpoint, we're really recognizing the critical importance of these creatures to our very existence here.
And there are some classes from the conference, if people want to view those, that have to do with pollinators.
Yeah. The name of the series, I looked online, the name of the series is My Garden of 1,000 Bees.
Yeah, it was just a program.
Oh, okay.
But that is the name of it. Yeah, I think My Garden of 1,000 Bees.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds right.
Okay. And it's PBS. It says Nature PBS.
Yeah, it was a Nature program.
Okay.
Yeah,
season 40, episode 1. PBS Nature.
It's right there, mygardenofA1,000bees.com. So,
and my sense is that's just one of the 40 different episodes within the Nature series.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good series.
Well, again, thank you very much. These were great questions. I appreciate your enthusiasm and all the things you do for bees and native plants and gardening.
Thank you so much for the information you gave us today.
I do have a question. I can probably figure it out online, but I did say save the chat. How do I find out where I saved it to?
I couldn't find that either.
So if you hit the save the chat and then you say show in folder, if you click the save chat, and that you'll see a little something pulls up at the very bottom of the chat. It says chat saved, and then show in folder.
Oh,
there's actually a little folder that pops up under Zoom, in the Zoom folder in your.
And if you search your computer for the word chat, CHAT, that text, you'll find it. That's excellent. I learned something new. Thank you.
Very good. And of course, David, we talk about this a lot. Is that Zoom is kind of the way in which we are all communicating at this point. So it pays to get good at this, right?
Right.
David,
Well,
thank you so much. Again, a tremendous amount of information in it. And by the way, thank you for being so welcoming for us to join your meetings, right? Because it sounds like there's a tremendous amount of information we can gain.
yeah, that's Zoom also. So
yeah. Any other comments, questions for David? Lots of information here, David, incredibly valued.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Okay. Any other comments for the good of the order? Else we can release you and we'll see the board back at 5:30 p.m. this evening. Again, everyone's welcome. And
I have a comment.
Please, Rhonda.
In case you didn't see my posting, this is the month that you can order native plant starts from the Thurston County Conservation District. Phenomenal pricing. You have to join their email list in order to receive the printout of the hundreds of native plants. Order now, you'll pick up in March.
Thanks, Rhonda.
I repeated the post down there. It's thirstoncd.com. thirstoncd.com. And by the way, these are, again, going back to plant sales and so forth. I mean, buy up these native plants, right? Put them down, collect them in March, as Rhonda's saying, and they'll be ready for our subsequent plant sales for those plants that you're not able to use in your own garden. Anything else for the good of the order?
Tuesday night, October 15th, the Satsup Methodist Church is doing their harvest dinner from 4:30 to 7 or so.
Harvest dinner, October 15th. Okay.
I thought that was nice of them.
Thanks, everyone.
It's your birthday, isn't it?
Right. That's a way to celebrate. That was so nice of them.
Helen, happy birthday.
Thanks, everybody.
Again. Congratulations.
Hey, you guys too.
Okay, guys. So Saturday is a very big important training on the 12th. Reach out to Wendy if there's any questions. We've got study group coming up on the 21st, and have a great day.
You too.
Thanks all.